Thank you. No, please hold the applause. We got to get going. So thank you for completing the survey. The first question that I usually get asked, is it happening July 1st? And the answer is no. It has been pushed back. It is most likely definitely happening maybe the fall of 2018. If not, definitely early 19. If not, by 2020, we got this whole thing figured out, right? So right now, the moving date is fall of 2018. Notice it doesn't say November, it doesn't say October, it says fall. So we'll see, maybe we'll see winter 2019 coming along there. Before we started, I asked you to complete a survey, and one of the reasons why I do that is I just want to make sure that I touch upon points that you came here specifically to learn from. And I looked at the questions there, and I'm pretty much going to cover everything. So if I don't this is going to be broken up into 3 sections. And so the first section is going to be the cannabis education section. The second section is going to be the workplace section. And the third is going to be the sort of workshop and case study that we're going to do. So if you have a question, I just would like for you to ask yourself, is this a cannabis specific question or a workplace question? And then if it's a workplace question, just hold off your questions to the second part, because I might be able to answer those at that time. The survey results are really interesting, and unfortunately I'm not going to be able to show you, but I will publish it after. So we had 29 people completed, and it's 50% support the legalization, 17 don't, and 34 don't know. And so what we're going to do is after the workshop, we're going to do another survey. And usually what I find is the no's don't change, and the I don't know, the I don't knows are the ones that change. So some going to no, some going to yes, but never has anyone, yes, I support, finish this thing and go, oh my God, I was completely wrong, or vice versa. If you don't support it, I'm not going to be able to change your mind. So it's the I don't knows, they're the swing vote. Most people are not confident or somewhat confident. It's a 50-50 split. And there's one person here who's very confident. So if you catch me saying something wrong, please let me know. Most of us are concerned about driving and children and the workplace. Those are 3 main concerns. And that's about it from that portion. So we're going to get right into it. And like I said, we're going to do a sort of a 50-minute split, 10-minute break, 50 minutes, 10-minute break, and so on and so forth. Last time I did this, I went sort of over, so I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible. In the Cannabis 101, you are going to learn more about cannabis than 90% of the Canadians out there, hopefully. And so we're going to talk about a little bit of the history, types, the benefits, delivery methods, testing, tolerance, and then addiction. So we're going to cover those things in this first half. Cannabis has been with us for a very long time. Archaeologists have found cannabis seeds dating back as far as 30,000 to 12,000 BC. So we've been using, as human beings, cannabis for a very long time. And it was usually done for medical, spiritual reasons for hunter and gatherers. And it was part of the mainstream literally until the 1900s. There's a couple of theories that the reason why human beings became so creative is we ate a lot of magic mushrooms and smoked a lot of pot and started drawing stuff on caves and trying to do different things with our rocks and spears and things like that. And that's a theory. But it has definitely been a part of human culture across the world. So it isn't somewhere that they think it might have originated in Asia, but it definitely spread out throughout the whole continent. And it is a hardy plant where it can grow in various climates. Hence why Canada is very excited, because not a lot of things grow here. We don't do pineapples and that sort of thing, but we can grow cannabis. I'm going to be trying to use the word cannabis as often as I can, because that is the professional proper term. pot, weed are slang terms. So I'm going to try to, and I catch myself sometimes saying the other ones, but I'm going to try to keep with cannabis. So everything was fine and dandy, and people were using cannabis for medical and recreational purposes, and there wasn't much of a problem. And then people started gathering more and more into cities. And as people gathered into cities, drugs and alcohol came into those cities, and opioids became a social problem, just like we have now. And we have an opioid crisis right now. The government decided to, and the opioids were initially used from specific cultures, and then it kind of spread out throughout the city. Opioids are addictive, much more addictive than cannabis. And so there became a war on opioids in the early 1900s. Then stiffer and harsher and additional drugs came into legislation as being illegal, and ultimately cannabis became illegal in 1923. And so it has been almost literally 100 years where cannabis has been illegal and is now being lifted from an illegal substance to a legal substance. In the 1940s, only about once it became illegal to use cannabis, Canada only had very few drug-related arrests. Then we had the 1960s and the drug revolution, and all of a sudden we spiked in cannabis usage, and then it tapered off in the early 1980s. And in the 70s, the Canadian or the medical establishment said, hey, I think there's some kind of medical benefits to cannabis, and the government was, no, we don't care about the medical benefits. It's an illegal, bad drug. It needs to be kept illegal. And because it has been an illegal drug, research into cannabis has been very difficult to obtain, and very difficult to conduct, and very difficult to get funding. And so we don't know a lot about cannabis, and what we do know, we've only known for the last 30 years where serious scientists and doctors are trying cannabis as an alternative. Then in 2000, a person who was very epileptic, the only thing that they found that helped their epilepsy was cannabis, but it was illegal. So it was taken to the Supreme Court, saying that it was a fundamental human right, that there was something out there that managed their epilepsy. No other legal drug was able to manage the epilepsy, and that person should have the right to be able to take that drug, to have a life, and not be arrested. So it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yeah, okay, you're right. So people were able to grow their own cannabis for medical purposes. But those of you who garden or attempted to garden, who has a dying garden bed on the side of their house that they tried one summer and it was too hard to maintain and that sort of thing, that was your thing. So it's really difficult to grow cannabis. It's not an easy thing. And so the fallout of that came about in later in the year, where it was asked, I don't want to grow my own stuff. I would like somebody else who's more competent to grow it for me. And that came into being in the in the 2010s, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The Liberal government tried to legalize cannabis in 2003. I still can't figure out how to say those dates, and they failed. And then the Conservatives doubled down on drug punishments and that sort of thing. In 2013, it became legal for licensed producers to grow and distribute legal cannabis. And then the Liberals came into being, and one of their platforms was that we're going to legalize it. 2015, they said they were going to legalize it, and they said that they're going to do it by July of 2018, which is not happening. It's been sort of pushed back because we're scrambling, and the problem is when people rush, cut corners, mistakes happen. And so a lot of people are saying, and the philosophy is, let's make it narrow first and slowly open the gates, rather than open the gates and slowly narrow, which I think it's a lot easier to give than it is to take back. And so a lot of provinces, cities are really scrambling to figure this out. A lot of entrepreneurs are sort of trying to get ahead of the game, and unfortunately, the market says that if you are the first on the market, just because you're first on the market, chances are you're going to be very successful at the beginning until people catch up. So people are trying to jump ahead and get ahead of the game so that when it becomes legalized, they can open the doors and go, here you go, because those individuals will start making money, and just because they were first, they're going to be much more successful than the other individuals coming in. That doesn't necessarily they're going to stay that way, but they're going to enjoy a couple of years of strong sales. In Alberta, 55% of us have tried cannabis at some point in our lives. 22 over the age of 17 have tried it in the last year and probably continue to try it every once in a while. And 7% say that they will try it once it becomes legalized. And a lot of people feel or are concerned that once cannabis becomes legalized, our society is going to be thrown in turmoil, and it just hasn't happened in the States where cannabis has become legalized. Studies have shown that the increase in DUIs and driving do increase in states that have legalized cannabis, but they're unsure whether it's because the police are now more reporting it more, or whether it's because it is an increase of it becoming legalized. And they also don't know whether it's that spike of it's now legal, so people are trying, and it's not normalizing yet of and people can't figure out when they're impaired or not impaired and that sort of thing. And they think there might be a spike, and then it kind of gradually goes down. The other thing that they found was that cannabis commercial places get broken into more often, which kind of makes sense. But you don't hear a lot of liquor stores being broken into, that sort of thing. But again, they're not sure whether that's going to be a normal thing or whether it's just society adjusting. Because there's two ways society adjusts to law. And one is the government makes a law, and it takes time for society to catch up to the law. And human rights, same-sex marriage, human rights is an example of that. Or, for example, sex, same marriage, the society doesn't view it as wrong, and so people are breaking the law, and so the government then changes the law to meet social norms. And those are the sort of two ways that laws come into being. Government tries to change people's perception, so they make a law, or people are doing something that's illegal and doing it a lot of, and they're like, well, we can't control it, so let's change the law because we're putting in people that shouldn't be in jail for things that most people consider normal. So it'll be interesting how that pans out. The government came out in October of 2017 of their framework, and your homework was to watch a video because we're live streaming and we didn't want to get blocked by YouTube. But I'm just going to give you a quick overview if you didn't watch the video of what the video stated. So you have the link there if you want to see the whole, I believe it's 52-page document. So the plan is that the provincial governments are going to oversight the growers, and they're going to regulate it. There's going to be advertising restrictions, just like there is on tobacco. So you can't have fancy fancy advertising. It will not have fancy labels and that sort of thing. You will only be able to get it in specific cannabis stores, and it's been made quite clear that it's going to be separated between alcohol and cannabis, and the two will not be able to be sold together. We're still waiting on, is there a distance between these stores? Because so a liquor store owner can't have it in the same, what's that preventing that owner from just opening another shop next door? And now they're running a business with a wall separated from them, and that sort of thing. Cannabis lounges and cafes are not going to be legal when it comes out, and this is one of the quagmires of cannabis. We're making it legal, but then we're saying, well, you can't do it there, you can't do it there, you can't smoke. If you're renting, your landlord can say you can't smoke in your home. So unless you own a home, and you can't smoke in a provincial park or in public or anywhere else, where are you supposed to do it? And this is one of these things, and because cannabis smells so bad, that it's really quite evident when somebody is smoking it, that somebody's smoking it in that area. So it's one of these things that people have a really hard time wrapping. Go ahead, it's legal, but you can't do it anywhere. And so where are those people supposed to do it? Possession, you will be able to carry 30 grams of cannabis on you. And so 30 grams is roughly around 2 packs of cigarettes, roughly speaking. So like a bag of loose cigarettes. It's a lot, right? It's a lot that you can carry on you. You'll be 18. There'll be workplace programs, which we'll talk about on the second one, addressing it, and they're working closely with employers to try to figure this out. And a lot of people are panicking for no reason. And the reason why is we already have drug and alcohol policies in place. The quickest and fastest way is just to add cannabis into your policy and you're done. You're literally done, because where a lot of people are sort of taking the high negative is people are going to be able to walk in, smoke, and come into work impaired. No, they can't drink right before work and come impaired. There's designated smoking areas, and it's not like nicotine where it takes 10 seconds to hit your brain and lasts 2 to 10 minutes. It lasts for 4 to 6 hours. And so there's no human right that says I can smoke and do drugs because it's now legal. That's like saying I can drink and show up to work drunk because alcohol is legal. It just doesn't make sense. So everyone sort of panicking and the whole thing where people are panicking is that impairment part. We have no and still don't have a valid way to measure impairment of an individual that has cannabis in their body, and that's really the big kicker. And for myself, for children, I'd rather, and I know this sounds terrible, I'd rather my children be addicted to cannabis than to opioids. I'd rather have my children have a cannabis problem than an alcohol problem. And it's one of those things that it's not as bad as scary. The reason why some people are so concerned about it is because it's been illegal and now it's going to be legal, and there's going to be a stigma attached to it until unfortunately, that generation, everyone here is dead, and the new generation coming in doesn't have that stigma of cannabis anymore because they grew up with it. Because imagine, you get a resume from somebody that has worked 5 years in a store that sells cannabis or that produces cannabis. What's your first thought? You smoke cannabis, right? And so there's going to be a lot of stigma attached to those jobs for a while, in my opinion. You're able to grow 4 plants, but it's not as easy as people might think. And at the same time, you need specific light. And if you really want good, strong stuff, you need an oscillating fan to agitate the cannabis plants to grow hardier and more potent. And just because something is good in Ontario or BC, because of the soil composition, because of the altitude, air pressure, oxygen levels, and different chemicals, a plant that is grown in BC from the same seed in Alberta or in Ontario or in Lethbridge or in Grand Prairie is going to be different, just because of those changes to the chemical composition of the soil, water, air quality that it's found in. So it's not going to be as easy as people think. The other thing that real estate is concerned about and they're looking into is due diligence. Because if you grow more than 4 cannabis plants, and that's the equivalent of me saying you can only have 4 cases of beer in your home at any time, how is that going to be measured? How is that going to be enforced that I now have to ensure that you only have 4 cases of beer at your home at any one time? It's a difficult concept to get your head around. So real estate agents, and depending on it, are looking at sort of best practices to then ask homeowners, do you grow cannabis in the home once it becomes legalized? And if the homeowner says yes, but only 4 plants, you don't have to disclose it. But if he says, yeah, I have 25 in the basement, stuff like that, now it becomes an issue of disclosure. And when a new homeowner comes in and goes, what's that smell? There's now a legal obligation to say, well, there's cannabis being grown in this home, or cannabis was grown in this home. And now question to you becomes, you're looking for a new home. Would you like a cannabis-free home or a non-cannabis-free home? Right? And these are the sort of secondary things that people weren't thinking about with legalization. And if you grow a lot of cannabis plants, there's mold damage, humidity damage, rot, and that sort of thing. And so real estate agents will really have to keep a good eye on. And then what happens is if you lie as a seller that says, no cannabis was grown in this home, and the new buyer moves in, and all of a sudden there's all this mold damage and additional electrical things that could only come from growing cannabis plants, guess what? That person is now on the hook because they lied about the condition of their home. So it's just an interesting kind of quagmire that we're going into. So 30 grams, 4 plus 18, specific regulatory bodies, and we still have no way of accurately testing for impairment. The reason why cannabis is such an interesting plant is that it has cannabinoids that we in our body naturally have receptors for our immune system, neurological system, nervous system. And when we take cannabis, we interact with it, and it actually has medical benefits because we have specific receptors in our bodies that the cannabis plant has that interacts with our body. There's 2 types of cannabis plants, and then a swack of hybrids between these 2 plants. There's actually more, but these are the two main ones. And then there's a whole bunch of hybrids. So the sativa is more of the happy, energetic, fun cannabis plant. And the indica is more of the calm, hey, let's chill and watch Netflix, let's go to sleep, that sort of thing. So if you've ever taken cannabis and you got sleepy, you now know why, okay? Because you were taking indica. You can take a cannabis plant, throw it into your blender, and make a shake, and you will get the vitamins and minerals and fiber from it, but you will never get the cannabinoids from a cannabis plant until it starts providing producing trichomes. These are trichomes, and so when you see a picture of cannabis, in a picture and it's completely green, it's not ready to be harvested. But if you start seeing this frost around the cannabis, then it's ready to be harvested, because these are the chemical factories that produce the THC and CBD that give the medical and psychoactive highs of cannabis. If you do it too early, that's not good. If you do it too late, that's not good either. And so it's one of those things that you really do have to know what you are doing when you're growing cannabis in order to get the wanted effect from what you're doing. So these trichromes, there's two specific cannabinoids, or two main cannabinoids. I think there's about 91 or so currently. But these are the ones that are the most common in plants, which is THC and CBD. THC is the psychoactive element. This is the one that gets you high and impaired. And when you take it, you'll have psychoactive effects, and this has been proven scientifically, cannabis is really good at pain management. And this is where other drugs are being replaced by cannabis, because instead of taking hard addictive drugs like opioids, you are then able to take a milder drug like cannabis and still be able to manage your pain. So a lot of people are taking it for back pain where they normally take opioids. Anti-nausea, appetite suppressant, or stimulant, sleep aid, and it has been shown to help individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder to cope better in that. CBD is the medical plant portion. This is where the majority of medical cannabis is part of its recipe, and it's the non-psychoactive, so it's been shown to be anti-convulsive, anti-nausea, anti-inflammatory, and anti-anxiety. So it has been shown and proven that it does have medical benefits. The street drug that you're currently using, or the street drug that's out there, has been specifically bred to have high THC. So the individuals that were taking cannabis in the 1960s, they were taking a much milder form of cannabis and getting a much milder high than what the current street drug is doing, because it has been specifically bred for that high THC content. What the medical community has done is they have bred out as much as possible the THC and put in the CBD. However, you cannot breed a plant with 0 THC. You can do a minimum, and you can go as low as 0.02%, but you can't go as 0. Now, this is anecdotal. Cannabis patients who take medical cannabis say that any cannabis that they take that's less than 1%, they feel no psychoactive effects. And this is just anecdotal. There's no research on this, so I went to this seminar and they said if people are taking this is asked by cannabis patients, and again and again, we're told and seen that if it's less than 1%, the psychoactive effects are not there as much. So the medical community has shifted it to the CBD and is using it for the medical purposes. Treatments: insomnia, pain, inflammatory, seizures, ADHD, epilepsy, Crohn's, Parkinson's, cancer, and arthritis. They're not cures, but they help manage those effects. Okay? So it's not a cure for cancer, but it helps shrink tumors or control tumors. So I just want to be clear. These aren't curing effects. These are management effects, just like we don't have cures right now, and we're taking other pharmaceutical that are artificially created, whereas a natural plant that you can grow at your home, depending on what kind of seed you can get the same effects. The benefit cost of medical marijuana is estimated to be, as a medical patient, can be anywhere from $500 to $10,000 plus in prescription. It's not a cheap drug. Benefit companies that specialize in this and that have provided cannabis as a medical option provide an account of about $15,000 to $6,000 per year caps in order to control the costs of medical cannabis. Because medical cannabis doesn't have a DIN, most companies will automatically reject it. I believe there's a couple of providers that are now just doing it on case by case, and there's a couple of employers that just voluntarily have added in. But most people are using the sort of DIN that it's not federally recognized as an actual prescription, so therefore we're not providing it, and isn't until employees truly fight either the employer or fight the provider that they go, okay, but we'll just do it for you. And then they wait for the next one, okay, we'll do it for you and for you. But a lot of people are not opening up the floodgates. So to learn more about cannabinoids and the receptors, there's a great video that you were to watch, and that pretty much summarizes much better what I just told you. But I hope I did an adequate job in sort of giving you a general idea. Please, by all means, go watch that video. It is very interesting information. We are going to have a supply and demand problem. When Colorado first opened their doors, they had people lining up around corners for the legalization of cannabis and getting the first legal cannabis. It is estimated currently we can only produce 100,000 tons of cannabis per year, and the demand is going to be about 500,000. And so it is estimated that until about 2021, 2022, we're going to have a shortage issue. Hence why when you're first at the gate, you're going to have lineups and lineups, and you're going to be just counting the money because you are going to be the only person. And with supply and demand, if you're the only one that is able to supply and there's a high demand, you can charge whatever you want. And so it's going to need a few years to stabilize and normalize in order to for cannabis to become legal in Canada. The facility that has opened around this area, which I'm not going to name, that huge facility, which is the largest facility in the world, can only produce 100,000 tons per year. So that facility in itself is still short a little bit. And so we're going to have a shortage problem. Currently, there's 200,000 registered medical cannabis users, which is roughly about 5%. It is estimated by Deloitte by 2021 that's going to be about 500,000, so it will be doubled because it will be more accepted. Doctors will be more inclined to prescribe it. Currently, there's about 22% of Canadians using it for recreational purposes, and Deloitte is estimating that it's going to rise to about 40% when it gets legalized in a couple of years. To contrast that, 80% of Canadians drink alcohol, 10% to the level of where they're causing health issues and harm to themselves, and 15% where they're 10% where they're causing harm to others, so accidents, falls, and that sort of thing, and 15% to where you're having heart and liver issues and you're slowly killing yourself. And so just to put that in contrast with cannabis, it's a very low estimate. And that 80%, that might be a couple drinks a year and that sort of thing. So there's multiple delivery methods. You can smoke it, you can eat it, you can make oils out of it, you can make creams. There's even suppositories that you will, if inserted in the appropriate orifice, you will then be able to pass a saliva test and a breathalyzer because it didn't go in through that oral cavity. So I reached out to a medical establishment and I asked them, or let me ask the group here, which one do you think is the most prevalent in medical cannabis? How many of you say smoking is the most prevalent? Eating? Oils? and lotions. Okay? I was shocked at this number. 80% of medical cannabis users still smoke it. And I was shocked. I thought it would be the other way around, but pills are expensive. And I'll just show you the duration and that sort of thing. And so at the same time, I thought once cannabis becomes legalized, that the majority of people are going to use oils. Edibles are going to be illegal till about 2019, if not more. And so what edibles are is you take the cannabis and you infuse it with brownies and cookies. In the future, some restaurants hope when you go in, they will say, would you like some Parmesan sprinkles or cannabis sprinkles on your spaghetti and that sort of thing. So a lot of restaurants are really interested in providing it as a service and get a little buzz with your dinner instead of a glass of wine. So smoking, the reason why it is so common and prevalent is it is the most immediate delivery method to your system. So upon smoking, within 5 minutes, you will feel something. You will peak out in around 15 minutes, and it will last 3 to 4 hours. So the reason why smoking is so prevalent is because it has such immediate effects, just like smoking does. So smoking is 10 seconds and lasts 2 to 10 minutes. Edibles takes about an hour to an hour and a half for you to actually feel it because it's going through your digestive system, whereas smoking goes into your lungs, into your bloodstream, into your brain, and gives and around your body. Where when you're eating it, it goes directly into your digestive system. It has to get processed through before it hits into the bloodstream, but it has a much longer duration. Same thing with oils, very similar to edibles because it's going in through the tongue rather than through the lungs, or lotions, it's going through the skin, and it has much longer effects. Because it's so specifically in tune with our own biochemistry, all of us right now, if I gave everyone a sample, I know you're disappointed that you didn't get one, but if we all had the same sample, the same proportions, none of us would have the same experience because of our individual biochemistry. And medicine has shown time and time again that aspirin might work for you, but not for you, right? That opioids might work for you, but not for you, because our biochemistry is so different. So we will all react very much differently. My mother-in-law is a medical professional, and she shared a story where 4 of her colleagues ended up going to Amsterdam for a medical conference. And during dinner, they realized none of them have ever tried cannabis, and they were in Amsterdam, and what a great opportunity to do it as a medical experiment. And so these are trained medical professionals, so they were looking at it from really a testing perspective. So they all took the same amount from the same source. They got a cookie cut up into 4 pieces. They each took one. One person felt nothing. One person felt a little tingle. One person had the worst case of psychosis ever. And the other person thought it was the best thing they've ever experienced. And this is why it's going to be so individual, and this is what makes impairment so difficult to test. And just like you can have a functioning alcoholic, you will have a functioning pothead, where if you take it, you will be on the floor, sleeping like a baby, and if they take it, it gets them up in the morning and ready to work. So that's where that impairment really becomes quite difficult. We can't do testing. Well, let me rephrase that. We can do testing, and the most accurate form of testing is blood. But there isn't anything that we have right now, like we can pull somebody over and say, blow into this, and said, yeah, you're high. There's just nothing like that. It looks like, at this point, 5 micrograms of THC is what people feel is a level of impairment, but there isn't any consensus at this point. Australia has decided to go with this but there isn't a lot of empirical evidence that says that somebody that has this amount in them is actually impaired, and it will only come out through the court systems. And if you are pulled over, one of the things that you can then request, whatever system that they're using, say, I would like a blood sample, please. And so what they now have to do is they have to take you to either a medical facility or something, draw your blood, and wait for the results to see whether you're actually impaired or not. And so from the moment that you were impaired to the moment that you get your blood drawn might be a few hours, if not something like that. So this is a really complicated quagmire along these lines. There's some companies that are doing tablet tests for cognitive functionality. And so what ends up happening is if you feel somebody is impaired, you whip out your tablet and say, please complete this test. And if you're like, oh, yeah, well, you're impaired. But here's the problem. Some people did better after smoking. Right? Because some people's concentration increases because of their biochemistry. So this is, again, one of these things that's like, I know this is going to be legalized, but we don't have the legal framework or the scientific data to say what. And mixing drugs and alcohol, well, that's a whole different thing. How many of you have drunk wine, beer, and whiskey and felt great the next morning? You don't do that. And the same thing, if you drink alcohol and have cannabis, your impairment is way lower than 5 micrograms. So again, it's tough. There's long and short-term effects of cannabis. So the most common stereotypical ones are memory, coordination, judgment. So you wait, or a couple days later, Amazon knocks on the door, and something that you ordered that completely forgot that seemed like a good idea at the time, you get at the door and go, oh, why did I want the full season of Scooby-Doo? And then paranoia, who sent this to me? And psychosis. Now what psychosis is you hear and see things that are not there. And if you take cannabis for a long time, you will have the short-term effects of it, and you can have, if you abuse it, the long-term effects of it as well. Long-term, it has been shown, especially in youth, that it hurts education and mental development. And this is why a lot of people are really concerned about 12, 15, 16-year-olds. And the empirical data says about till 25, your brain is still developing. And so if you are taking it between the ages of 15 and 25, you are at the most risk of doing some permanent cognitive delays if you're doing it quite heavily. Everything in moderation. So a really good video on psychosis is that one. So again, I recommend that you watch that if you haven't already done so. Can't talk about cannabis unless we talk about addiction. Out of the most common drugs, and consider heroin as opioids, because that's what heroin is, cannabis is the least addictive mainstream drug. However, if it is introduced to youth, that turns into 17%. Okay, but most alcoholics were introduced to alcohol at an early age. You don't become an alcoholic at 45. You usually become an alcoholic early in your life and you struggle with it. And so it's one of these things that, although tobacco is the most addictive, somehow it's okay, and has the most health, 90% of all lung cancers are tobacco related. That's a scientific fact. Yet, we're okay with putting in tobacco into our lungs, and we then support the medical system for those individuals with lung cancer because they did it to themselves. Fully no, I don't think anyone who smokes, if you tell them, did you know that this causes lung cancer? They'll go, what? I quit. It just doesn't happen. So addiction is interesting. A lot of people think it's a chemical dependency, and it is to a certain degree, but you can beat chemical dependency. It only takes a few weeks or a few months to purge the chemical dependency from your system. But what ends up happening, most addictions occur because of social or lack of social relationships, support. And it's been found, and there was an actual live experiment done where the Vietnam War, the majority of the soldiers were addicted to opioids because it wasn't a great place to be in. And a lot of people were concerned once the soldiers came back to the United States, they were going to come back to a whole bunch of heroin addicts because there was such a large dependency of heroin on the front lines. But guess what? They came back, and the majority of the soldiers quit cold turkey. How could that be? It's supposed to be a chemical dependency. And what has been found is that chemical dependency is only a small portion. If you have a good, happy life, fulfilling career, fulfilling relationship, fulfilling family network, a strong family network, you're engaged in the community, you have purpose in life, you have direction, you have motivation, you're able to kick most addictions with enough support. But what we do with addicts is the opposite. You're addicted, we send you to jail. That's the opposite of love, caring, social networks. We literally put you into a cage and say, be better. And that's what happens with addicts in the workplace. When an addict enters your workplace, you are their last of defense, because if you reject them and send them out onto the street, it's game over. So we have a moral obligation to addicts that enter into our workplace to at least give it a good, solid go. Because if you give up on them, the rest of society has already given up on them. And you need to provide that support if you're able to. So another great video on addiction there that please feel free to watch. And before we jump into our next segment, I'm really concerned about my children, but I'm more concerned about opioids, bullying in school, social media, self-esteem than I am on cannabis. And studies have shown that if you build meaningful relationships with your kids, that if you interact with them, keep them away, not ignore them, keep them busy, educate them, show interest and develop their interests and participate in their interests, and have them be involved in community and community sports and activities and participation, the chances of them ending up using drugs is smaller. But it has also seen that social sports increase the use of alcohol. Because you're 17, 18, go to a party with a group of friends and somebody goes, hey, have you tried this? So don't worry, no matter what you do, you're going to mess up your kids. But at least be involved in their lives, but not too much, because that'll ruin them too. But having good, solid trust relationships with your children, keeping them active, because boredom leads to trouble. You're bored, you don't have much to do, you don't feel that you're being accepted by your peers or your friends. Well, you'll seek out individuals that will accept you. And sometimes those individuals aren't good players. So that's your crash course on cannabis. And we just hit the perfect 15-minute mark. Any questions that I sort of didn't address on the sort of cannabis chemistry portion of what you came in here for? And I'm just going to also look at the chat room here. Anyone? Yes. Oh, wait, you have to have the blue box.
Okay. Is it working? Oh, okay. I was just wondering if there's going to be limits on what distributors can sell cannabis for, like price points.
That would be called price fixing. And I am not aware of that direct question. So what I can tell you is it's medical cannabis right now goes around for $12 per gram. And so it's what the market is going to bear. Just like there isn't any tax of what you can't sell a beer for, I don't foresee the government coming in and saying you can't sell it for X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
But that's a personal guess. I have no scientific or research to back that up.
Okay. I don't want to.
There was a question here. Blue box. Here, let's throw this and see how it goes.
I was just wondering, you talked about lung cancer is caused by tobacco and things like that. So if smoking is the way that most people are doing cannabis, is there health issues?
Absolutely. Just like the vaping trend that it's just air, right? And then how many of I had employees trying to smoke vape inside our building when it first came out because it was just air, and now it has come out. So anything that you burn, it goes into your lungs. That's soot. That's burnt grass and leaves. Of course, it's going to have effects, but from the research, it doesn't have as bad effects as tobacco. So the answer is yes. There's no magic. There's always cons and pros. And if you're burning or putting anything into your body with anything that you do in excess of, it's going to have negative effects. You have a little bit of sugar, it's okay. You have 2 pounds of sugar a day, it's going to kill you. Does that kind of... Anyone else? Is this messing you up, having 2 mics? Okay. That's it. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll go into workplace readiness. There's a few things to eat, coffee, bathrooms. Men bathrooms are around the staircase. Do not go into the first bathroom that you see. And then for the ladies' bathroom, it's right beside the staircase. Okay? We'll see you in 10 minutes. So in your package, you have the slide presentation. Try to done succinctly so that we kill as few trees as possible. I provided you with a simple, non-legally binding example of some policies that you might want to implement. And the idea behind these 4 policies is it's better to, on the scale of risk, you're better to have something than nothing. And one of the reasons people are so hesitant is they think that policies need to be very complicated and specific and multiple steps and that sort of thing, and they can be. But what policies are intended to be is a guideline and not a hard and fast rule, because the government or the courts have said you cannot treat people with a broad brush. It needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis, and all the facts need to be looked at before you make a decision. Where a lot of organizations get in trouble is they don't do their due diligence of investigating, trying, and their first response is you're fired. And if that's your first response, you will always lose in court because you didn't even try. Whether you were right to fire or not stops being the focus, and the focus is you didn't even try, so they win by default. Okay? So you do have to at least make some effort when this comes up, and having short, quick policies is way better than having nothing. But the problem is the more detailed and convoluted your policies are, the more handcuffed you become to what you're supposed to do. Because if it comes up to court, the first thing they're going to say is, show me your policy. And you show them the policy that you've downloaded from some online Google thing that you found that's 15 pages long that you thought was pretty good, and you say, there's our policy. And the court system's going to say, yeah, you didn't follow point 4. Therefore, by default, the other person wins. And so it's a double-edged sword. Policies are good. And whenever you have any issues in HR, the first thing that you should do before any investigation, before any questions, before any decision, is you whip out your manual and you look at what your manual says you should do. Because what ends up happening, we tend to just sort of jump and start doing without taking back and say, okay, I need additional information. And the best process is, do we have a policy for that? And if the answer is no, then you research of what kind of policy you should have, and then you try to follow that so at least there's some kind of process. Because on the spectrum of things, it's like you do nothing and have no policies, it's high risk. You have dozens and dozens of policies, well, that's not good either, because you have to do everything your policy says in order to be on side. And so there's this Goldilocks zone called reason that the courts want you to enact of each case is going to be individual, and you're not going to be able to make a full decision unless you have all the facts. And if you didn't look at the opportunities or the options to you, you're offside and they win by default. Our 2018 Christmas parties are going to get a little bit interesting. Because you know there's going to be somebody that comes in with a bong going, hey, it's legal. And in that same aspect, it's like somebody started light up a cigarette here. Just, it's not allowed. And you can ban cannabis from your functions. You can say, please don't bring any cannabis, and be part of your social events, and saying that cannabis is not allowed on the premise. Just like you can say, we'll serve beer, but we're not going to serve hard liquor. Is anyone going to go, that's against human rights violations right there? What do you mean you're going to serve beer but not hard alcohol? I am offended. And people are like, no, like, let's think about this reasonably and rationally. As an employer, as long as you're not violating human rights, which are the 13 areas, you can pretty much do whatever you want and have the policies, whatever, as long as they don't violate that. Nowhere in there does it say I can smoke cannabis whenever I want. And so let's get that out of the way, that fear out of the way, that you can manage cannabis the way you want, and you're already managing drugs and alcohol, and you're just adding cannabis as an additional alcohol and cannabis. Some companies do a 4-factor where it's legal prescriptions, illegal prescriptions, legal or illegal street drugs, and legal drugs. So for example, like T4 or some painkillers that a person steals from somebody else and they're not supposed to have. So some people do it into categories. I don't think you need to go that fine-tuned. And again, it's one of these things, the more you go into the rabbit hole, the more you then have to follow that rabbit hole, and the more you have to ensure that you're in line with your policies. And so having a general idea and treating a person reasonably and fairly, you're going to be okay. And one of the things that I always kind of, when I think something's going offside or I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing, I'll always ask, if that was my grandmother or my mother or my sister or my brother, what would I do? If this was a person I truly cared about, would my first answer be, you're fired? Well, no. We would try to work things out first, right? Just like your spouse comes home and they start smoking cannabis, you're not going to go, we're getting a divorce. You're going to try to work it out and then get a divorce, right? So this is the most simplest way I can explain cannabis in the workplace. Yes and no. So cannabis has entered into your workplace. The first question you're going to ask is it medical? If the answer is no, you treat it like alcohol or an illegal drug and you follow your disciplinary. If the answer is yes, you follow accommodation. Now, I want to be careful on this next part here, but some people have an authorization to use cannabis, and that's not prescription. Okay? So just because they have the authorization to use cannabis that is not their prescription to use cannabis. So if they just have an authorization, you don't have to accommodate, but you should ask, I need a doctor's note saying that you need to take this stuff. Okay? So just having an authorization form doesn't give you the right to then ask for accommodations. Where the accommodations comes in is when you are able to provide medical documentation from your doctor stating that, yes, this person has to use cannabis. It doesn't have to be medical or whatever it may be. I don't know how that comes about, but I just want to be very clear that the authorization and the prescription are two separate, and you don't have to accommodate the authorization. That might change, but as I currently understand it, that's the sort of dividing line. Next question. If the answer is no, your question is going to be then, is there a dependency? Okay. And if it's a dependency, I hope I shared that. The first part is a moral obligation on the employer to at least try. And when I say try, is it needs to be a partnership. Because if you say, I want you to go get help, we're able to provide you with the EAP. We book the appointments. We'll give you a schedule so that you can attend your appointments, come back and finish your shift. So you don't even have to pay for them to go to the appointments. Let's say the appointments are in the middle of the day. You can go, no problem. You can come into work from 8 till noon, go to your appointments, and then work 2 to 6. We're more than happy to accommodate you. You have to understand that accommodation doesn't mean do everything that the employee says. It's a partnership. By definition, a relationship is mutual. And so both people have to be in the relationship for the better good and work with each other. If one side, the dependent, doesn't want help, doesn't think that they need help, doesn't show up to the appointments, and you can request from the psychologist or the medical doctor a touch point or follow-up. Is the person attending? And are they participating, or are they sitting like this for an hour because I'm mandated to keep my job? Right? So you are legally able to be a partner in this. You have no right to say, what's going on, what are their issues, how's their family life, that sort of thing. But you can ask is, are they participating? Are they willing to try to work this out? Or are they, in your opinion, are they just here because they have to be here and they're going to just go back to their dependency? But you have to try. The courts were very clear on that. You can't just say, oh, you're an addict. We have a policy that says no addicts, you're done. Okay, you have to at least try. However, if that person isn't willing to try, and you've documented that we had a meeting, we've mandated that they go, we've even made an appointment for them, and they still didn't attend, well, how far do you have to go? You go, you know what, thank you very much. It's not working out for us. Here is your severance package, or with enough warnings, documentation, because the government has made it so hard now to terminate somebody with just cause that it literally is easier to go, here's some money, please go away, than try to say, hey, look, we have 2,500 pieces of evidence on you, and somebody goes, oh yeah, but you're missing 0.6 of your policy, it doesn't count. Like, it's very difficult right now, I find, to terminate somebody with just cause, because there's always a loophole, and there's always but you didn't try. But did you think about this? Oh, you jumped to your conclusion too quickly or too often. We recently had we had a workplace violence incident where an employee shoved another employee and they got terminated. And the employment standards officers called up and said, do you have a policy that says you can't shove another person? I can't believe I have to answer this, but yes, I do. Oh, okay. Can you please prove to me that they read that policy? Luckily, I teach policy and design, and I'm like, yes, absolutely I can. Here you go. May I please see their performance review? And how long have they been with the organization? Look at the documentation. This employee's been with us for 5 years. They have a spotless record. This is their first incident. You should have never fired them. You owe them termination pay. And my response was, so what you're telling me is if I'm a good employee and I've been with the company long enough, I get one punch? That's what you're telling me. So I better make it count. No, that's not what I said. That's what you said, pretty much. If you're a good employee and you do workplace violence against the policy that you knew, you were trained, provided videos, and I have policies, I was still outside. What I would like, please, is from the government stating that and they provided that, we appealed and we won, luckily, in the appeal process, and we did it strictly for principle. Because I was just floored going, are you kidding me? But the people making these decisions are human beings. There's always going to be human judgment, and the same case with the same individual, whether they are making a decision before lunch or after lunch, or whether they have specific biases, it can go either way. So this is why it's so difficult to fight cases cases in court with documentation, because if you don't have a piece of paper, it didn't happen. You can literally have a note on a napkin, and it's better than verbal testimony. So I don't want to talk too much about accommodation because the government of Alberta provided a beautiful 108-page document on everything that you ever needed to know on accommodation, what it is, what steps you have to take, and that sort of thing. So please just go to albertahumanrights.ca, type in duty to accommodate, and you'll get a great PDF, and you will learn everything that you need to know about accommodation. What the court systems have said about cannabis is that there is a difference about safety-sensitive roles and non-sensitive roles. And the people that have high safety-sensitive roles should be held to a higher standard. Meaning, a crane operator is treated with a higher standard of behavior and impairment than a graphics designer who comes in high into work and starts drawing pictures on a computer screen. The outfall of the impairment from the graphics designer to the person operating a crane or driving, the impairment or being impaired, the fallout is much more severe from the driver or the crane operator than it is from the graphics designer or the office person. Meaning that if an office person comes in impaired, you are to be a little bit more lenient, less hardlined than an individual who has a high safety-sensitive role. And I think we would all agree that's fair. Because the people that have high sensitive safety roles usually are also paid much higher than people in non-high sensitive safety roles. And they have to be accountable, because if they come into work impaired, not only will they kill themselves or hurt themselves, they have a high probability of doing that around them. A graphics designer or an office person, probability of them hurting somebody or themselves is very low. And the government has been very clear. You need to separate between safety-sensitive and non-safety-sensitive positions. So if you have some kind of strategy or want to implement some kind of strategy, your best strategy is to focus on the safety-sensitive positions first, get that going and right, and worry about the low sensitive, low or high admin side later. You don't have to do everything all at once. And that just eases a lot of pressure off you. So, with high sensitivity positions, you also have a lot more, well, skin in the game and ability to work with that individual. So, for example, you can request discussions with the employee and their doctor to talk about their usage and scheduling, how long it lasts, when will they be impaired, will they be impaired. So you have, because of their high sensitive position, you can request meetings, you can't demand them. And I would argue individuals that care about their jobs and really have to take this are going to cooperate with you. Just because in my experience, I have found there's two types of employees. One type of employee comes into work with a broken hand and say, hey, I can still type, I can still push the broom, I can still lift boxes with this hand. And the other type of employee, broken hand, see you in 3 months because I can't do anything. Right? And those are the two types of employees that you're going to get with cannabis. The one type that's saying that that's going to go like, I know I'm doing this, I'm willing to work around that sort of thing, anything that, and you can tell, those of us who are in HR, I've experienced this enough times that you can tell who's genuinely interested in working with you and who's there using the system or who's finding the loopholes to get additional time off and that sort of thing. It's really frustrating. And unfortunately, sometimes HR professionals get jaded and we just focus that everyone's trying to use the system, and it's not the case. So really what you have to worry about is that THC level and dosage and scheduling and time. And again, it's one of those things that you can ask. If it's medical cannabis, what's the THC level? And again, the anecdotal, not scientifically proven. If it's really low, below 1%, you really don't need to worry about that impairment, which is anecdotal and self-reported. Just want to be clear on that. And then what kind of accommodations? The accommodation might be a different shift, might be additional breaks, might be more frequent breaks. I once had an employee who went to the bathroom for a half an hour all the time. So we sat down with them and said, like, what's going on? I got sensitive bowel syndrome. I have to go to the bathroom every hour for a half hour and the whole thing. No problem. Punch out during breaks for the half hour that you're done. And you can work your 8-hour shift till 7 o'clock. They quit the next day. Right? And so people who are truly, genuinely grateful for accommodation, grateful for a conversation, for mutual problem solving and working, you'll be able to tell. The individuals that are fighting you, finding the minute details and loopholes, you just have to be a little bit more careful about, but go in with an open mind. Because the majority of people don't want to take this stuff. They're not, yay, I get to take medical marijuana or cannabis for my chronic pain. It's really a last alternative because they've tried everything else. One of the things that employers always get in trouble with is making rash, quick decisions, and that's never good. And so one of the things that you might want to do is if you don't know what to do, remove that individual into a non-sensitive role until you can figure out what to do with them. Send them home, paid, until you can figure out what to do with them. But ultimately, the best thing to do is give them office work, scanning, training, whatever administrative, low sensitive position until you can figure it out. Because for whatever reason, we have this, we need to solve this now. And the problem is when you make decisions with little information, you usually make the wrong decision. And when you make a decision on a high emotional level, you usually make the wrong decision. So if you're going to really make a severe, difficult decision, take 24 hours, sleep on it, see if you feel the same way the next day, and chances are you might be a little bit more lenient the next day. You can request an independent medical exam that you pay for and say, okay, this is what your doctor says. We'd like a second opinion. You can choose the doctor or we'll choose it for you. We'll pay for the thing, whether they also agree that this is something that you should do. The problem is here, most doctors do not want to step on each other's toes. And I think we've experienced this, some of you, where you don't agree with a doctor, or you go to a second opinion, and they get your medical file, and they'll go, well, this doctor said this or that, or you complain about a doctor malpractice or something like that. They do not want to step on each other's toes because it's a community. So there's things that you can ask. You know, how long are they going to be on this? Is this a permanent disability or is this temporary? When are the appointments? When are the absences? Can we work around that schedule? Are they fit, even if they take this, are they fit for duty? Okay. Even if they're on it, depending on whether it's CBD or THC, can they just work normally? And I have a cohort who the individual was an electrician. And, well, you gotta say that being an electrician is a high sensitive position. And they were able to work things out with that individual and give them not working with live electricity, and giving them sort of, so they were still doing electrical work, but didn't work with live electricity. And it's, again, but you only come up with that when you brainstorm in a group of individuals rather than you trying to figure out your system. That's not your responsibility. You are not the problem solver. The only way you're going to get good ideas is getting together in a room with the doctor, the supervisor, the employee, yourself, and openly and honestly discussing the situation and wanting the best outcome. If you're trying to do a aha, I gotcha, it will never work. It will always come out in the court system that you set up somebody for failure. Yes. Oh, hold on, where's my blue box? Wait, you can't ask questions right now. Sorry, go ahead.
You can only ask those questions for people in safety.
You have more, yeah. So so the question is, so you can only do these things for safe, sensitive roles, and this is where reason and rationality comes in. So the answer is, you are definitely able, in safe, sensitive roles, to ask all of these questions. With non-sensitive roles, and like I said, graphics designer, office worker. Okay, so that's an excellent question. Well, it depends. So then you would ask about impairment and whether it impairs their judgment when they're on this kind of. But that's something that needs to be done with a medical doctor. They're not going to be able to tell you that. You're not going to be able to tell you that. So the court system said you have a lot more flexibility with safe, sensitive positions. But you have to, you're walking, and the reason why everyone's so frustrated, people want straight answers. And the court system says, your answer is, it depends. And you have to be reasonable. What does that mean? Well, that means when you and another person are having a discussion and you make a decision, will 12 other individuals think that is a reasonable, rational decision? Right? It's just, there is no straight answer. So the question, the answer I'm going to give is, you have a lot more liberty with high sensitive positions. And the question becomes, if you're asking these questions on low sensitive positions, why are you asking them? Are you asking them for a reason? And is it a valid reason? And then the answer is, yeah, you can ask it. But if you're asking to be nosy just for additional information that's irrelevant to the conversation, then I'm going to say that's an offside question. The great thing is, we have lots of case law to tell us what to do, because the government doesn't want to have a straight, hard, black and white answer, because what it wants you to do is it wants you to take it case by case, and depending on the factors, relationship, position, everything included, then you're supposed to make a decision. Because if they just gave you, well, here are the 5, 6 elements, and if this is the smell test, if they don't pass the smell test, then you can fire them, well, everyone would do that. And they would ignore all the other elements that might come into play. So I implore you to check out this website. It's available to the public, and it has every single case law that Alberta has published, or that Canada has published publicly. And all you have to type in is cannabis, sexual harassment, workplace violence, attendance, and you will get a plethora of case law, and hopefully you'll be able to find a case that's similar to yours currently, and to get some guidance of how that judge played around. And the nice thing about case law is it refers to other cases that you can also then take a look at. Guess what? This is what the lawyer does when you call them. Except they don't do it, they have their assistants do it, and then provide you with a $400 bill for going online and Googling it. So we have learned some lessons with case law, and the lessons are as such, these recent ones. Zero tolerance policies can be upheld for specific situations and industries. Terminations can be upheld for breaking policy, not being dependent. You need to have a policy of disclosure, and you need to provide support for that employee in order to be an on-site termination. Whenever you fail to investigate, it will always be a problem and you will lose. When you focus on the prescription and not the accommodation, you will lose. And that safe, sensitive positions are evolving in the area of the law, and there's higher standards for safe, sensitive positions. Discipline must be proportional, so the graphics designer can't be equally punished as the crane operator coming in impaired. It needs to be proportional to the violation. Yep.
Now, how are employers to know what are safe from a program? Where would you fit on that safe crane operator?
So the question I always get asked is there a list or criteria of what a safe, sensitive position is? And this is the way I answer that question. Just cause. You can terminate somebody for just cause. We all agree for that, correct? Is there a definition of just cause or what just cause is? Or is there a legal definition for just cause or what just cause is? The answer is no. Where you find just cause is in the case law of where the courts deemed it just cause. There is no actual definition of just cause. You have to make a judgment call, reasonable, rational, because the court system don't want to say, these individuals, safe, sensitive positions, these individuals are not. So the answer to that is there's no legal definition, and you have to make your best bet. And you have to do a job hazard assessment, which you're supposed to do anyways. And an individual coming impaired, I would say, you are taking care of children. Absolutely, that's a safe, sensitive position. Because if you forget Jimmy in the toilet, or that you have a child that has soiled their underwear and they are now 3 hours into their soiled underwear and now they have a bloody rash, I would say absolutely that's a safe, sensitive position. But you have to make that judgment call. Excellent question, thank you. So you can do policies upon policies upon policies, but be aware, when you create a policy and you don't follow that policy and you create it for the sake of following that policy, you're going to lose. So be very careful what policies you include. It is recommended that you have a duty to accommodate, prescription, drugs and alcohol, fit for duty, impairment, investigation, and termination processes. However, you can combine these, right? And so again, it's a single pager to give you some ideas. These haven't been checked by a legal counsel or doctor, but they're better than nothing if that's what you're sort of looking for. And the idea is for you to sort of generate and to build from, and to prevent you from going copy, paste, I'm done. Because every single company, every single position is going to be unique. My company deals with mechanics and parts people. My mechanic can kill themselves and others while working on a heavy-duty truck. My forklift operators can crash a forklift, which is pretty much a tank, and kill anyone. My admin staff, well, they're not that safe sensitive. However, my credit that gives out money, absolutely, impairment is an issue. So we each, and the government is very clear, is we're going to give you general guidelines, but it's up to you to make that final decision. And it's frustrating. Believe me, it's very frustrating. You want straight answers. Just tell me. Give me a list. Let me follow. What's just caused? Nope. Look at all the factors, and then you make a decision, reasonable and rational, whether you should terminate that employee, and have you looked at all the options? This is where it's very useful to go into that website, type in what issues you are going through, and read a couple of case laws to at least get you some ideas and which way the judge went and why that judge went and what was missing in that process where it went for the employee, or what did the employer do right, because guess what? Employers sometimes win, that they did properly. And again, Toronto, mandatory drug testing is coming up for debate again. Now, there are some industries that mandatory drug testing has stuck because they were able to prove that they have a systematic drug and alcohol issue in their industry and in the workplace. There's been other companies that had no issues, documented issues, and they put in mandatory drug testing and they lost because it wasn't reasonable for this company to have it, but it was completely reasonable for this company to have it. And that's where that confusion comes into the public. Because one day you're reading, it's like thrown out. The other day you read it, and it's upheld. And you're going, can't we get a straight answer? And the answer is no. No, you can't. You have to look at everything and then make a decision whether it's a straight answer or not. So accommodation, you can be very creative. But you're only going to become creative by having an honest dialogue with that individual on what kind of accommodation they're looking for. And guess what? The first thing you should ask is, what would you like? And just because they would like it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they're going to get. Well, I want every Friday off paid. How about you get every Friday off and you come in on Saturday? If you need Fridays off, no problem. I've had issues where individuals have come in and said, oh, because of X, Y, and Z, I need Fridays off, or I need the full Friday off. I looked into it, I did my due diligence, and it turned out they didn't need the full day off. They needed only the half day off. I said, no problem. Work until noon, and then you're free to go and then come in on Saturdays and finish off your other 4-hour shift. The person quit. A person that truly appreciates the accommodation is not going to do that. Allow for longer, flexible schedules. And this is where a lot of companies fail because they're saying, if we treat people individually, people will ask for accommodations. And so it's easier for us just to say, no, everyone has to follow this rule, otherwise you're fired. And it's been shown time and time again that the court system says a company of 3 and a company of 3,000 has a different set of options and outcomes and how much financially they can take a hit. So there was a person that asked for to be removed from night shift from a manufacturing company because they were a single mom and they couldn't find childcare, and the childcare that they could find was 3 times what they were actually earning on night shift. And they said, this is not sustainable. I need to be taken off night shift. Otherwise, I just can't find childcare. And the employer said, everyone is mandated to work night shift. If we allow you not to work night shift, other people will ask the same, and it's going to be really difficult for us to manage. No. They lost in court. And they lost in court only because their first answer was no. They didn't even investigate. whether it was an option. It was that's the policy. You don't like it, quit. So with prescriptions, you should have a disclosure clause that the person tells you they're on some kind of prescriptions. They don't have to tell you what the prescriptions are. Because you can Google it, and then you'll get a whole bunch of things that that prescription can do or help, and you might make a wrong choice or that sort of thing. So you are not allowed to ask for the type of prescription or what the prescription is, but you can definitely ask about the side effects, accommodations, duration. When do you have to take it first thing in the morning? Or can you take it after work, be impaired during the evening where you're at home, and come in clean, lack of a better term, during your shift? And if the answer is no, prove to me with medical documentation from your doctor that says you can't take this in the evenings, that you must take it right before you go to work. You are able to, but you're only going to be able to have this with a conversation. People are so afraid to talk. If you're genuinely interested, you can have a decent, open, honest conversation, and it shows. Start talking to people about these accommodations rather than jumping to the conclusion that you can't assist them. It might be something simple. It might be one task. It might be you take away this task and you give it to somebody else, and you take that task from that person and you give it back to them. But what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't go, okay, well, we're going to reduce your workload by 40%, and we're going to give this 40% workload to everyone else. That's not really fair. So what you need to do is, we'll take this 40% workload, give it to this group, but we're going to take the 40% workload from this group and give it back to you. And I think everyone would agree that that's fair. Fit for duty is another one, where it pretty much just says, when you come into work, you're able to work. Now, impairment doesn't mean high or drunk. Those of you with small children, I haven't slept in 7 years. I love coming here because I get to sleep in a hotel room. But guess what? I still wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning because that's usually when I get a buck in the head of, please change my diaper. And so being tired, taking NyQuil, driving all night, coming in from an airplane, that's impairment too. Food poisoning, being sick. So that's why you focus on the word impairment and not you're drunk, you're high. Because that throws a level of judgment right away into the conversation. When I was teaching I teach at the university, and I had a student come in that looked impaired. Now, I could have went, you are drunk, you are high, but I didn't know. And I said, I'm concerned that you are impaired and you're acting oddly, not normally the way you do. And guess what? That employee took new prescriptions and they were a little bit loopy. Had I go in, it's like, obviously you're drunk. Or people with diabetes, with low blood sugar, they start slurring. And they look impaired, but they have low blood sugar. And so having that conversation of, I'm concerned you're impaired, rather than you're drunk or you smell like alcohol, is a much more neutral way to have a conversation. Terminations should be the last option. Meaning that you've tried at least a couple of things that didn't work out before you terminate. The court system also says, if you have a company of 3 and a company of 3,000, that company of 3 doesn't have to provide that much accommodation as the company of 3,000. It's not fair. So if you're a company of 3, everyone has to show up every day because you only work 8 to 5, and there's no reason or rationality for one person to work till midnight because that's not what your business model is about, you don't have to accommodate. But if you're a large organization with multiple positions, with multiple roles, you have to brainstorm a little bit of how can we address this. Because the time, and employers are having a really hard time around this, is I hired you for this specific job, and if you can't do this specific job, you're fired. Which is weird because no one says, well, we would promote you, but we hired you for this specific job, so we're not promoting you because we only hired you for that specific job. But that's literally what you're saying. Right? And so just because you hired an individual for a specific job, and now that relationship has changed, not due to any factors under anyone's control, you can't say, well, too bad. However, you can if you're a small organization. How small? It depends. The only thing I will, I'll follow the procedures. So if you have a way to terminate, look at your policies. The first thing that you should ever do is always review and look at the policy. So if you're terminating somebody for attendance, look at your policies first. If you're terminating somebody for workplace violence, sexual harassment, look at your policies first because you read them 5 years ago and you might not remember what you're supposed to do, or you think you know what you're supposed to do. So the first thing you ever do when a problem or a complaint comes across your table is, what do our policies say? And you're doing it for guidance. Because there might be a small step that in your policy says, we will talk about accommodations, or we will investigate accommodations, and you didn't, you lose. You lose that 10 out of 10 times. Because your policy said, this is what you're going to do, and you didn't do it. Make sure your documentation is in order, private, respectful, and always have more than one person in the room when you're terminating and ensuring that you respectfully walk that individual out. And not like, okay, go grab your car and provide an alternative. Would you like a cab? Because if you've just terminated somebody, usually you've just shattered their financial security because 70% of people live paycheck to paycheck. Now they're a mess. They might be the only provider for their family. And now they're getting into a vehicle in distress. And they drive and have an accident. Guess who's that's on? You. Because you didn't provide the appropriate means for them to get back home. And all you have to do is say, would you like a cab ride home? Can we call somebody for you? Nope. You've done your due diligence. And being involved in, so the question was asked, who are you? You were never introduced, you just started talking. So let me just quickly, so I am the HR, health and safety and IT manager for a heavy duty truck dealership. We have 6 dealerships across Alberta. I also teach at U of C and Mount Royal human resources courses, and I also teach at construction associations, leadership, supervisory roles, and legality, and that sort of thing. One of the courses I teach is policy and design. And because I work full-time as well, I also teach time management, by the way, if anyone's interested. And I have 3 small children and a lovely wife that also works full-time. And one of the things that I have found with employment standards and the court system and that sort of thing is, if it's not written, if your documentation is not perfect, you can still do the verbal, written suspension termination, and you can still fire them, and there will be some kind of loophole that will come out of it. And sometimes you're just better off, and this is what the oil and gas companies do. They're just like, okay, we tried everything, we followed everything, we are on side with our policies, but here's some money, please go away. And unfortunately, that's a decision that you're going to have to make. Do you have enough documentation? And one of the things that I highly recommend, especially if you're new, is talk to a person that you trust. Sit down with them and say, this is the documentation that I have. This is the wording that I have. Do you think it was been clear enough? Because what can happen is you have written somebody up and you say you will follow up in 2 weeks. You followed up in 2 weeks, but there's zero documentation that you did. Didn't happen. You didn't follow through with your written documentation, so now that documentation is void. The other thing that happens is incidences can stretch over time. And that's to prevent, it's like, well, you made a mistake in 1990, 2010, and now you're fired. That's not very fair either. And I can't stress enough that you can only solve a cannabis issue in your organization, whether it's dependent or medical, when you have an honest conversation with that individual. That's the only way you can do it. And that comes in sitting down in a neutral place, once all the emotions are down, and saying, what's going on? How can we help you? What are some of the solutions that you think we can do? Who should we talk to? Can we talk to your doctor? Can we have a meeting with your doctor? And believe me, some doctors are going, I provided you with that little piece of paper. That's good enough. And you can say, okay, but that piece of paper isn't an ace in the hole. You can then say, okay, but we need proof of what you can and cannot do. So you push it back and saying, okay, here's a list of all your duties. We will pay the doctor to do this documentation. What can you and can you not do because of this accommodation that you have? You have a lot of power. You have a lot of rights. And so just because you get a note saying, I have this condition and I need these accommodations, your answer is, great, give me the reasons why and the medical proof from your doctor that you need to have this accommodation. I had an employee come with me that we started a gradual return to work. We started at 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, and then we stalled at 6 hours. And I wrote the employee back saying, when are you going to go back to full duties? And I got a doctor's note, and the doctor's note, 6 hours works great for this employee, continue indefinitely. And I pushed back to the employee saying, I need medical proof that says that 6 hours is detrimental to your health, or 8 hours is detrimental to your health, and 6 hours sometimes magically is okay. Next week, I got a doctor's note, continue with 8-hour shifts. Because what you have to also understand is, who's the client for the doctor? The employee or the employer? The doctor doesn't care about the employer. Where does the information come from? The employer or the employee? The employee. And the doctor has to trust what the employee is saying is true. And so you can only push back by requesting notes with specific, tell me that 8 hours don't work. Not that 6 hours is great for you. Hey, I'd love to work 6 hours. I don't think anyone here would go, it's like, would you like to work 6 or 8 with the same amount of pay? I don't think there's anyone in this room that would go, sign me up for 6. Reach out to your network. Ask questions. If you don't know what to do, don't do anything. Reach out. Ask your network. Go online. Google it. Be careful what you Google. Okay? But reach out to your network, and I implore you to have patience. Because where companies have always failed is they make a rash decision with little information, and had they waited a week, or they sent an employee and said, go see a doctor. If we don't get a doctor's note in 2 days, you're fired. Go see a doctor. You got a week. My doctor's on vacation. No problem. How long is your doctor on vacation? 3 weeks. You're on unpaid leave until you get the doctor's note. We'll work with you. You're not fired. You're just on leave. Now, ideally, you'd like to pay them, but again, if paying them is disruptive financially for small organizations, you can say we can't pay them while they're on leave. And an organization that is making $1 billion a year is going to have a hard time saying, yeah, we can't pay $2,000 for this employee for this week. That will break us. And that's where the court system says, no, no, no. It has to be everything in that spot. And people get really frustrated with me because they come to me and say, I came to this seminar for answers. You just told me it depends and I have to do research and listen and look into the thing and like ask a whole bunch of questions and wait. That's not what I want. And what I'm telling you is that's what you have to do. And there's no right or wrong. Sometimes there's no right answer. And that's the kicker. Sometimes there just isn't a right answer. And whether you keep them, it's wrong. And whether you fire them, it's wrong. So what are you supposed to do? Had before we end this, had a person come up to me and said, I have this situation. I have this employee that comes into work smelling like cannabis. And so I talked to them, and they said that their spouse smokes medical cannabis, not them. And there's nothing that they can do. What am I supposed to do? So I open up to the floor. Somebody comes to you for advice saying, I have this employee, smells like cannabis whenever they come in from home. We talked about it, we addressed it, and it said, my spouse smokes medical cannabis, there's nothing that I can do. Yeah. Absolutely. The question was, so can you ask for proof that you smell like cannabis because your spouse has? And the answer is yes, but how easy is it to forge documentation this day and age? But absolutely, you can. Right? But we're now focused. So what's the issue here? Well, but the issue is the smell. Right? The employer isn't concerned about them being impaired. It's a retail job. I should have mentioned that. It's the smell. Beautiful. Okay? No problem. We would like you to leave all your uniforms at work. Here is Febreze. Please spray yourself before coming into work, hopefully organic or whatever it may be. And then, so what you have to understand is it's one of these things that's like, well, their spouse smokes, there's nothing that you can do. There, people that are willing to work with you will say, you know what, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And the people that are lying to you will go, no, that violates my rights. How? Right? That's actually a really good one. My idea was like, hang your clothes for work in the garage or outside or somewhere not where your spouse smokes. And that's, but I like your idea way better. Right? This is what happens when you talk in a group and you exchange ideas. So your plan of attack as we end, so we're going to take a break and then we're going to go into workplace, and then we'll go into, so look at your policies, address recreational cannabis, because medical cannabis has been already legal since 2000. So we're 18 years behind if you're putting in medical cannabis into your policies. Make sure you provide training for your employees of the new policies and you have proof that the new policies are read. And this is an easy thing to do when you are giving a promotion to somebody or giving an increase. So the easiest way to get employees to sign off on new policies is when it's time for a raise, and you go, okay, we're giving you a $2 raise, please sign these policies first and read them, that you've read them, and we'll give you your increase. Guess what? Those policies will be read like that. If you email company-wide saying, please read these policies at your leisure, good luck. Okay, so give a little bit of a carrot to sign those policies. Yes?
there's very rarely regular, but at times there's often bonus with a bonus.
Absolutely, bonus. Correct. Some companies annually just make people sign policies and say, until you sign all of these policies and read them, don't come into work. Right? I think that's a little bit iron-fisted, but what the courts say is we want proof that they were aware of these new policies, right? And so an easy method is you email everyone and say, you know, respond that you've read this, or you post it online, they read it, they click yes, type in their name, you have some kind of proof. However, the most ironclad is original signature with dated and the piece of paper and scanned, but you have to make your choice. I would say safe, sensitive positions require the signature. Non-sensitive positions, online training, click, that sort of thing. You have to be reasonable and rational about how you're going to implement it. Chris, you have a question?
Yeah, I got 2 questions. Reminder, and make sure that we're using the cube for the questions.
Can you repeat that question?
Can we make sure that we're using the cube for the questions? The people can't hear it online.
Okay.
So when we're using it on that side. And second, I can't read the question then if I'm standing by the gear, right? There we go. Do all of these procedures only relate to cannabis problems as it relates to accommodations, or are we going to be talking about them for non-accommodation issues coming up?
So we're going to do the case study on it. The reason why we focus so much on accommodation is it's the most complicated, okay? So when somebody, and I get this criticism a lot, it's like, well, you never talked about the other aspect when it's non-accommodation, but that's simple. If it's a non-accommodation issue and the person doesn't participate, and so for example, that person, so let's use the person with the retail that smells like cannabis, that is not a non-accommodation issue. So the process is simple. Please stop smoking, or please stop coming into work smelling like cannabis. No, I won't. No problem. Here's your first warning. Next day, they come in smelling like cannabis. Okay. Can you please put your clothes out and come into work tomorrow so you smell like cannabis? No, I won't do that. Second written warning. And here, we'll put your uniforms and keep them here, and you can change at work. No, I won't do that. No problem. Comes in smelling like cannabis. You fire them. And so the accommodation is a lot more complicated, whereas the disciplinary process is if there's open communication, you're trying to work out the issue of it. It's the same as asking, well, what do I do when somebody comes in drinking beer? Well, what would you do? Please stop drinking beer. You are now written up. The next day they come in drinking beer, what do you do? Please stop drinking beer. Do you have a dependency problem? I don't have a drinking problem. Okay. Don't bring in beer tomorrow. Brings in beer again, you're done. And what you have to understand is when it's quick and easy, discipline works. You're not showing up on time, that's a quick and easy fix. You're not showing up on time because you have small children, you're a single mom, you can't find daycare, and daycare only opens at 9, and your shift starts at 9:30, and there's no way you're going to make it across the city. Well, guess what? Accommodations, maybe you can start at 10. With simple, easy things, discipline works. Complicated things, constructive coaching, accommodation is something that you need to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the work, we're going to read the case study. You're going to discuss the case study. I specifically left out what the judge said and how the judge decided, because you will have to then, if you're curious enough, go online, look at the case law, and make see what the judge said. Don't use your phones. Okay. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. So before we get started into the case study, those of you who are joining us online and don't have the case study, You're more than welcome to hang in there, and we'll do a Q&A in about 15, 20 minutes or so. And we're going to just talk about the case study. But before we do that, we do have some online questions that I do want to address before we continue on. And so one of the questions, that comes in is, why are you saying cannabis, and is it legal to say marijuana? And the answer to that question is, saying marijuana or pot is the same thing as saying stogie, moonshine, draft, to refer to alcohol. And so when we talk about alcohol, we say alcohol as the drink. And so marijuana is a slang. Pot is a slang. And so it's not that it's illegal, but it's the equivalent of you talking to an employee and say, I think you have an alcohol problem, and going, I think you have a vino problem. Or too many stubs have been drunk today, hey? Like, it's one of these things that it's just more professional and more appropriate to refer to marijuana and pot as cannabis. And also there's a stigma attached to pot and cannabis, and the proper term is, to pot and marijuana, and the proper term is cannabis. That's what it is. And so that's why I'm using the word cannabis. It's not that it's illegal, but it's more appropriate to be using the word cannabis. What was the other one, Chris? Okay, so the question is, how is this different from union versus non-union? And the answer is 0, other than you have to look at the union contract to see what the proper procedures to the discipline, process, and accommodation is. And believe it or not, most of the case law is union, because unions will fight and know more of their employees' rights than the average common individual in the private sector. So the answer is, it doesn't differ, other than what ends up happening in the hierarchy of law is that you have your rights and freedoms, human rights, common law, employment standards, union contracts, and employee contracts. So employee contracts are on the very bottom. Union is just one step up. Just like you can't, with an employment standard, I can't give you a piece of paper that says you can speed on the QE2 200 kilometers an hour. It's against the law. So I can't create a contract or an agreement between anyone else, or I give you a piece of paper, it's okay to steal. I know that the common law says no, but our employment contract says that you can, so go ahead. You can't create an employment contract or a union contract that is above common law or human rights, charters of freedom, and that sort of thing. So that hierarchy goes in there. So the short answer to that is, it doesn't differ, other than the unions will have a much more stricter process to follow, and they will fight the grievance on the behalf of the employee, and hence why the accommodation is so important to work it out, rather than saying you're fired, because the union will always fight back and try to get the person's job back. A union is legally obligated to fight on your behalf. That's why you pay union dues. Any other questions? Any questions from the floor before we start? All right, so this is how it's going to work. I sent out the case study beforehand. Hopefully you've read it. If you haven't, I chose a really simple one. I could have went with 60 to 200 pages, but I went with a nice quick one, because this one also addresses that non-medical side where somebody is arguing the medical side. Okay, so that's why this case law was picked. So what I'd like you to do in your groups, and I think what we'll do is, the two of you, if you could go over in that corner there, and so there'll be 4 of you there, and I think that will then be nice and fair and round. Read the case law, and then think about, was the termination correct, and what could have the employer done better or not? And then we'll just sort of talk about the case law the things that came out of it, something that you might have found surprising or didn't expect, what you think the judge might have ruled, and then we will quickly discuss it as a group, and then we will go into Q&A, and then you're free to go. So we'll go around in a group, and what I'd like for you to do is just pick one element each, because we have a number of tables here, just one element, so whether it's for yes or no, so was the termination justified? Should have he been justified based on it? And the argument is, I was discriminated against my disability. I needed to use cannabis or marijuana. Again, it's in legal documentation being used marijuana. Again, it's not inappropriate or illegal to use that term, but it's something that society is shifting towards cannabis. And so in summary, and tell me if my interpretation is the same as yours, the employee was caught smoking cannabis. The employee said that the employer knew that the cannabis was medical and for chronic pain, and the employer knew this the whole time, and they still terminated him, and that this was inappropriate, and that his termination shouldn't stand. Are we fair on that? Pretty much? Okay. So the question becomes, this table over here, who's your spokesperson? Oh, throw them the box. Who's the?
We're very undecided.
Okay, undecided. Is there a table that's that agrees unanimously? Is there a table that's everyone is for yes or no? You agree? So let's start with that table first.
Great.
So who's the spokesperson? Okay. So your agreement is yes, the termination should stand, or it was unjust?
We believe that it was an unjust termination.
Because?
Because I don't believe that management was able to prove beyond a doubt that, like there was no documentation on file about any verbal warnings or anything like that. Now, number one, I'm a little confused because he initially was not fired because of the marijuana thing. It was because of poor performance and so on. So on that basis, definitely he can't be fired.
Okay.
Okay.
So we have it wasn't a just termination, Chris?
They're saying the termination was not justified, and the employer and documentation to prove their point.
The employer can always do a better job with policy and documentation. Absolutely. Any other table that agree unanimously that it should have been a... Okay, so yes or no?
It was unjust.
Okay, so it was unjust?
Unjust. Like said by the other table, the lack of documentation and there was no accommodations.
Okay, so we have another unjust. Anyone else? Okay, so this table agrees. So do we, are the online people in agreement?
We also said that it was unjust for similar reasons that that table mentioned, is that there was zero documentation as to like his poor performance and behaviors. And then they're kind of going back after, like during this case, being like, oh yeah, but like even if he was smoking, then like we didn't have to accommodate anyways. So they're kind of like flip-flopping. So I think like in that case, it doesn't really stand.
Okay. And anyone for the termination? You don't have to agree with your table, and I think we'll just end there. So we have some time for Q&A. Since you guys are so outgoing with your answers. Okay.
So based on the case, when I read it, it says basis on the physical disability. Based on this case and the employee not providing medical documentation prior to the termination, then yes, I would say that based on this case. But I agree with everybody else.
Everyone bring out your pitchforks. It depends. Okay. So we're going to end online. Do they have a... Nothing new. So I'm going to be very evil with you. I'm not going to tell you the answer. Nope. The reason why is I literally want you to go to the database. It is such a vital and important thing. And if I just give you the answer, I'm just giving you a fish. I need to teach you how to fish. Okay? So I want you to go into that website, look up the case study, and here's the great thing. You just need to scroll all the way down, and you will get your answer of what the judge has decided. And I do truly want you to go to that website and check it out. And that is why I'm being so mean. So not talking about the case study, and everything that you guys said was absolutely true and valid. And what I will say is there was a little bit of discrepancy and lack of evidence of trying to prove that it was a disability. It was the majority of that was after the fact. Was the employer incompetent with their documentation policy and smoking along with that individual? I'd say yes, right? But remember, it all depends on who reviews it, what their thinking is, where their head's at, what their previous biases are, how they feel about cannabis, how they feel about an industry, how they feel about the individual, how credible each of the parties are involved. And so the answer is it depends. And I would argue one judge might swing one way and the other judge might swing another way. So it's very difficult. And I implore you, if you're having a hard time figuring out what to do with your specific case, read both for pro and for against documentation. Don't look at one and go, aha, this is what I will follow. Grab about 3 or 4. This is what this is what a lawyer does and charges you $500 for. And they will say, well, in this case, these were the factors, and in this case, these were the factors, and I would recommend this. And so instead of paying $400 per hour, do a little bit of research, and 3 hours later, you will learn a lot more than you knew at the beginning. Okay, so any questions about workplace readiness, about cannabis itself, or anything like that? Or you just want to go home? You have a question? Okay, I'm going to throw it to you. Ready? Otherwise, we spent lots of big money for that.
What steps does an employer need to take in order to prove that they've been made aware of a duty to accommodate?
So that varies. It depends. You need to notify the employer. The employer, by definition, and there is an actual definition, is when one person reports to you, you are an employer. Okay, so if you direct the work of individuals, you tell them what to do, you are the employer for that individual. So if a person says, hey, I have cannabis or I smoke recreationally, they technically have disclosed to the employer that they have a disability or that they're a recreational smoker. So it can vary from just telling somebody to the process of making it into a written, providing a written statement that they have prescriptions or they have impairment. Now, here's the problem. I'm an employee. The policy says, please provide it in writing that you have a disability or that you use cannabis. I tell you, because you're my direct supervisor, therefore you're an employer, and you go, okay, and you don't tell me to provide it in writing, ball's in your court, right? Because the onus can't be, well, they should have read the policy, they should have been aware. It's the supervisor then says, thanks for letting me know, can you send me an email? Can you fill out this form? Can you do X, Y, and Z as our company policy? So just because your company policy says provide it in writing, and they go, aha, see, they never provided it in writing. And they're going to go to the employee and say, who did you tell? And they're going to say, I told Bob. And Bob, did you tell so-and-so to provide it in writing? Yes. Where's your proof? And so it's one of those things, again, you're not looking for that aha, gotcha. Let's have a conversation. Right? People deserve a chance. And one of the things that has shown that ignorance is not a defense, right? I didn't know, as an employer, is not really defensible, or the employee should have known. You need to provide proof that an employee knows what to do. And even if they disclose verbally and you don't follow you're not following the procedure either by saying, please provide that to us in writing. Yes, wait, blue box.
Just wondering if you're having a conversation about accommodation, is it better to have two managers or whatever, like the supervisor and the manager there? Partly, you say the 50% of employees who really do not want to work with you, who just want to be off on leave or whatever, versus having the employee feel like, oh, now there's two of them and one of me, are they ganging up on me? They're not really trying. So sometimes when it's just a one-on-one conversation, it feels more like we're working together. Yep. But that risk, if it's a person who doesn't want to accommodate and who really is looking for an out, is there a kind of a good answer?
I would argue that the people that need to be involved is HR, because they will know a lot more about employment law than a manager or supervisor or an employee, so they can help that way. The other thing, it should be definitely a direct supervisor who's going to be working with that individual. And so I would argue, absolutely, you send it up to the HR director and the senior manager. Those two individuals are discussing that issue. That might be quite intimidating. Okay. And people need to have a safe environment and feel safe in order to speak openly and honestly. And so that's the onus on how you create the conversation of, if you sit in a table, employees on this side and both managers are on the other side, well, you've just indirectly created an adversarial environment rather than sitting next to the individual and trying to have a conversation. And so the question is there a sort of best way, or, isn't having two managers a intimidating meeting where one-on-one is better? And I would say, sure, you can start with one-on-one, but if it's not going well, ask for help, right? And I would argue it's not a 50-50. I would literally say that it's about a 5 to 10% of the bad players that make life difficult. It's not a 50-50 split. Most people are genuinely good. They don't want to do these things. It's something that they have to. And if it's consciously their choice, that's way easier, right? If you're conscious, hey, I'm a pothead, I bring in a T-shirt with, pot for life, and that makes it easy, right? But when it's somebody who's struggling with an addiction, or it's somebody who's struggling with chronic pain, and this is their only option, you need to have a conversation. Any other questions? Was that appropriate enough?
Yeah.
Any online questions there, Chris?
Can you report a conversation with an employee?
So that's interesting. The answer is yes. In Canada, the law says as long as one person is aware of the conversation, you can record anything. So one person. Whether it'll be admissible in court is another question. So it's not illegal to secretly record somebody, but whether that conversation will then be allowed as evidence is a whole different ballgame. So my recommendation is this to you. Everyone has a recording device. You put the recording device in, and you say, is it okay if I record this conversation? I will give you a copy of this conversation as well. They say, yes, your name?
Barb.
Barb. And so what I do is I turn on the recording and say, this is Adam. It is now April 12th at 11:15. I have Barb in my office. Barb, can you state your full name? I'm not recording. Do I have your permission to record this conversation, and I will provide you a copy with it? And now both people are aware, and you have a recording where both people are agreeing to have the conversation recorded. I also implore you to do this during investigations, because you will forget the nuances and that sort of thing. And again, it's like, I've recorded employees in investigations, and the first thing is like, why? Like, no. I'm going to share this with you. You can have it at any time for your record and mine. I just want to make sure that there is no misunderstanding for our conversation. Otherwise, it's going to be a he said, she said. But it's ideal that you get the recording and permission and the person to state their name and that they're agreeing to the conversation. Rather than, do you agree? Yes? Let's start recording. Okay, you've just shot yourself in the foot. A statement, a written statement, hand-signed and dated, will always win over an email or a blank document that's not signed and stated. Okay? So an employee provides you with a statement, and it's just on Word, and that is your electronic copy. You print it out, you give it back to the employee, say, please sign it and date it that this is what you've written, because that has bitten me as well. An employee has provided me with a Word document statement that they emailed to me, and 2 years later, is this your statement? No. But you emailed it to me. Wasn't me. And truly, I don't have proof because it's not signed, it's not dated, and now the judge has to say, am I lying or is the employee lying? Who's more credible? So signed, dated signatures are always better than electronic databases or electronic footprints, but an electronic, yes, this person saw it, checked it off, and hit submit, is still proof that it occurred. And that is way better than having nothing. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, wait, blue box. Throw, pass.
Thanks. Could you then use that, if you were to record that conversation, could you then transcribe it, have them sign off on it, and use that as documentation?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But you would also provide them. So the other thing that employees also have to understand, during an investigation, they don't have right to all the documentation in the investigation. They just have the right of the documentation that pertains to them that doesn't violate any privacy of the other. So they don't have access to other people's statements because none of that is their information. They might be talked about, but that's not their information. So just be aware that in an investigation, you can give your employee a summary of the decisions, but you are by no means legally required to hand over all of the documentation that is responsible for your decision. That is something that if it comes out in court, and please remember, only 1% of cases ever go to trial. Because no one wants to have a public record of a database that they did something right or they did something wrong or they had to defend themselves. So what you're saying is a very small sample, and we're sort of put into a fear mode that everyone sues. Most people don't sue. They don't have the time or the resources to hire a lawyer in order to do that. That's why you see a lot of unions in the case law, because they have the motivation and the resources to challenge the terminations. Most people, if you're fair to them and you treat them respectfully, it's sort of like, imagine coming home to your spouse and your spouse says, I want a divorce, and here's my better upgraded partner and spouse that I've just picked, please leave. You're gonna be jaded. And you're gonna take them for every single dime that they're worth. Versus, you tried counseling, you made a legit effort, you've separated your ways, you've tried living alone for a year or so, you come back and you say, you know what, it's not working, I think we would be both happier, not together. That divorce is gonna be way better. And that's what I'm trying to sort of instill in you. When you jump the gun and you go, I want a divorce right now, I'm not gonna investigate, I'm not gonna go into any options, it's gonna get ugly. But if you take the time, you work with the individual and you show that you've tried, things didn't work out, and your only other alternative is to terminate them, chances are it's gonna be a much easier separation. Thank you so much for spending your morning with me. If you have any additional follow-up questions, I think you all can reach out where?
Can either reach out via the EC or direct to Adam if you would like on that side there. A couple of quick things. If you guys can fill out your evaluation forms that are also in your packages, the photo and consent release forms, make sure you take some of those baked goods that are stale there. Make sure you take them home for lunch. And let's all thank Adam today for taking
Thank you. And I have one more favor to ask. Once you're done that, if you can go online and complete the post survey about your feelings towards the things. And this, the post and pre-survey will be emailed to you. I will email the results to Chris, and Chris will email the results to all the people attending about the shift change between the before and the after and the questions and that sort of thing.